During dinner, my sister announced she would inherit the house and that I was out of the will. So I did the unthinkable. I should have known something was wrong the moment I walked through the door. You know that feeling when you enter a room and everyone suddenly stops talking? That happened, but worse. My mother's laugh cut off mid-sound. My father's eyes went somewhere over my left shoulder, and my younger sister Bethany practically glowed with some secret she was dying not to tell me. Even the cousins looked uncomfortable, shuffling their feet and suddenly fascinated by their phones. It was Thanksgiving, and I had driven 6 hours from Chicago back to my hometown in Ohio. 6 hours of highway monotony to sit at a table where I clearly wasn't welcome. The house smelled like turkey and lies, if lies had a scent. They probably smelled like my mother's overly sweet perfume and my father's nervous sweat. My grandmother was the only one who met my eyes. She sat in her usual chair by the window, hands folded in her lap, watching everything with that sharp gaze that missed nothing. She gave me the smallest nod, a warning maybe, or solidarity. With her, it was hard to tell. "Valerie," my mother said, her voice hitting that particularly shrill note she reserves for when she's about to ask me for something. "You're late." I was actually 15 minutes early, but pointing that out would have started the holiday off on the wrong foot. Well, more wrong than it already was. "Traffic," I lied, setting my bag down. There was an empty chair at the table, right between my Aunt Carol and my Uncle Pete. Not my usual spot. My usual spot, next to my grandmother, was occupied by Bethany, who was practically vibrating with excitement. Something was happening. Something they had all discussed without me. Something they had planned and coordinated and probably rehearsed. I could feel it in the air, thick and cloying like my mother's green bean casserole that nobody actually likes but everyone pretends to eat. I made it through the appetizers on autopilot. Shrimp cocktail that tasted like cardboard. Cheese and crackers that might as well have been sawdust. My father kept clearing his throat like he was about to make an announcement, then thinking better of it. Bethany kept touching her hair, preening, glancing at her fiancé Marcus, who sat beside her looking smug in a way that made my teeth ache. Marcus. I should talk about Marcus. He worked in finance, which he mentioned approximately every 12 seconds. He drove a car that cost more than my annual salary and wore a watch that probably cost more than the car. He was exactly the kind of man my parents had always wanted for me but never got, because I had the audacity to choose my own life over their expectations. Bethany had done everything right, in their eyes. Stayed local, got engaged young, chose a man with money and prospects. She was 26 to my 32, and somehow she had already won the daughter competition I hadn't even known we were having. Dinner was torture. My mother kept giving my father significant looks. My father kept giving Bethany significant looks. Bethany kept giving Marcus significant looks. It was like watching a tennis match played with eyeballs and passive aggression. "So," my Aunt Carol said, clearly trying to break the tension, "how's Chicago treating you, Valerie?" "Cold," I said. "Windy, hence the name." Weak laugh from the table. My grandmother didn't laugh. She was still watching, waiting. "And work?" Uncle Pete asked. "Good. Busy. I got promoted to senior analyst last month." This should have been a moment for congratulations. Instead, my mother made a dismissive sound in her throat. "All that time at the office," she said. "No wonder you can't find a husband." There it was. The first jab of the evening. I was supposed to defend myself, to explain that I actually liked my career, that I was dating someone casually, that marriage wasn't the only metric of success for a woman in the 21st century. But I didn't. I just took another bite of turkey and let the comment hang there. My grandmother made a sound too, but hers was different. Disapproving. Directed at my mother, not me. The meal dragged on. Mashed potatoes. Stuffing. Cranberry sauce that came from a can but that my mother pretended she had made from scratch. I counted down the minutes until I could reasonably leave, mentally calculating whether I could make it back to Chicago tonight or if I would have to endure the pull-out couch in the basement. Then Bethany stood up. She clinked her knife against her wine glass, and the table fell silent. This was it. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. "I have an announcement," she said, and her voice trembled with excitement or nervousness, or maybe both. Marcus put his hand on the small of her back, supportive, possessive. My mother actually clasped her hands together like she was watching a proposal. Maybe she thought she was. "Mom and Dad have made a very generous decision," Bethany continued. She looked around the table, making eye contact with everyone except me. "They're transferring the house into my name, all of it. The house, the property, everything." The table erupted. Applause. "Congratulations." My Aunt Carol actually squealed. Uncle Pete clapped my father on the back. Marcus beamed like he had personally earned this through his mere presence in our family. And then Bethany looked at me, finally, directly, and she smiled. "Sorry, Val," she said, and her voice dripped with false sympathy. "I guess that means you won't be inheriting anything after all." The cruelty of it took my breath away. Not the disinheritance itself. I had never expected anything from my parents. But the public nature of it, the performance, the way she had gathered an audience specifically to humiliate me. Except I had suspected something exactly like this. I had suspected it 6 months ago, which is why I had brought something with me. A leather portfolio that I had left by the front door, which I now stood up to retrieve. 6 months ago, my parents had called me with an urgent request. They needed me to sign some papers. Refinancing papers, they said. Simple paperwork, nothing to worry about. But they needed it done quickly, immediately, this week if possible. I had worked in financial analysis long enough to know that simple paperwork was never simple. And "don't worry about it" usually meant, "you should definitely worry about it." So instead of signing, I took the papers to a lawyer friend in Chicago, someone I trusted, someone who knew how to read the fine print that my parents had hoped I would overlook. It wasn't refinancing, it was a debt transfer. My parents were trying to transfer their mortgage, their second mortgage actually, one I hadn't even known existed, into my name, along with about 18 months of missed payments, along with penalty fees and interest rates that would have bankrupted me within a year, along with a foreclosure notice that was 3 months away from execution. The house I had grown up in, the house my mother polished and my father mowed, the house that looked so perfect from the outside, was drowning in debt. And they had tried to make it my problem. When I called them to confront them, they had a story ready. Medical expenses, they said. Unexpected costs. They were desperate. They needed my help. I was their daughter. How could I refuse? But I did refuse. I told them I had shown the papers to a lawyer. I told them I knew exactly what they were trying to do. I told them no. Absolutely not. Never. And if they asked again, I would report them for attempted fraud. My father had gone quiet on the phone. My mother had cried. Bethany, listening on speaker, had called me selfish and cold. And now, 6 months later, here we were. They had found another victim, another daughter to sacrifice on the altar of their financial irresponsibility. Except this time, they thought they could make it seem like a gift, a generous transfer of property, a blessing to the good daughter. I walked back to the table with my portfolio. The room had gone quiet again, but this time it was because everyone was watching me, wondering what I was doing. My grandmother's eyes followed me with something like approval, or maybe anticipation. I set the portfolio on the table in front of my father. 20 people in this room, 20 witnesses to whatever came next. "Dad," I said, and my voice was steady, calm, almost pleasant. "Are you going to tell her the truth, or should I?" The color drained from his face. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Bethany looked between us, confused, her moment of triumph suddenly uncertain. "Tell me what?" Bethany asked. I opened the portfolio. Inside were copies of everything my lawyer friend had helped me compile. Mortgage documents, missed payment notices, letters from the bank, a foreclosure timeline, 6 months of investigation into exactly how bad things were. "Tell you that the house comes with over $100,000 in debt," I said. "Tell you that Mom and Dad are 4 months away from losing it to the bank. Tell you that they already tried this with me 6 months ago, and when I said no, they decided to try it with you instead." The silence that followed was the kind that presses against your eardrums, the kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. Someone dropped a fork and it clattered against a plate like a gunshot. "That's not," my father started. "It's all here," I interrupted, spreading the papers across the table. "Second mortgage taken out 3 years ago. Payments stopped 18 months ago. Total debt including penalties and interest. $107,000. Current market value of the house. Maybe $90,000 if you're lucky." Marcus reached for the papers. He was the finance guy, after all. He would understand numbers. I watched his face as he scanned the documents, watched comprehension dawn, watched his expression shift from confusion to shock, to something much colder. "You never mentioned this," he said to Bethany. His voice had an edge I had never heard before. "I didn't know," Bethany whispered. She was looking at our parents now, and the glow was gone, replaced by something brittle and breaking. "You didn't tell me." My mother tried to recover. "It's not as bad as Valerie is making it sound. We have a plan. We just need to—" "You need to transfer the debt to someone else," my grandmother said. Her voice cut through my mother's babbling like a knife. You needed a daughter to take the fall. And when Valerie refused, you moved on to Bethany. Mom, my father said, and he sounded wounded, like he was the victim here. Don't, my grandmother snapped. Don't you dare try that with me. I raised you better than this. Uncle Pete was reading the papers now, too. So was Aunt Carol. Whispers started circulating around the table. Cousin Jennifer had her phone out, probably texting someone. The perfect Thanksgiving dinner was imploding in real time, and I felt nothing. No guilt, no regret. Just a cold, clean satisfaction that the truth was finally out. Is this true? Marcus asked my father directly. All of it? My father opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. We were going to... There are options. You didn't think she needed to know? Marcus stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. You were going to let her sign papers, transfer property, tie herself legally to over $100,000 in debt, and you weren't going to mention it? It's not like that, my mother said, but her voice had gone thin and desperate. We were going to help. We were going to make payments. It would have been fine. You haven't made a payment in 18 months, I said. What makes you think you would start now? Marcus was staring at Bethany like he had never seen her before. Did you know? He asked her. No, Bethany said, and she was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. I swear I didn't know. They told me it was paid off. They told me it was a gift. A gift, Marcus repeated. He laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. A gift of debt, a gift of bankruptcy, a gift of destroying our credit before we even get married. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. I need to leave. Marcus, wait. Bethany reached for him, but he stepped back. I can't, he said. I can't do this. I can't start a marriage like this. With lies, with hidden debt, with parents-in-law who would do this to their own daughter. He left, just walked out the door and drove away. I heard his car start, heard the gravel crunch under his tires, heard the sound fade into the distance. Bethany crumpled back into her chair, sobbing. My mother rushed to her side, shooting me a look of pure hatred. Look what you've done, she hissed. Look what you've done, my grandmother corrected. You tried to ruin one daughter, and when that didn't work, you tried to ruin the other. This is on you. More cousins were leaving now, uncomfortable, embarrassed, wanting nothing to do with the family implosion happening before their eyes. Aunt Carol and Uncle Pete were gathering their things, whispering to each other. Uncle Pete caught my eye and gave me a small nod, whether in support or farewell. I couldn't tell. My father sat at the head of the table, staring at the papers scattered across the surface like they might suddenly disappear if he looked at them long enough. My mother was stroking Bethany's hair, murmuring consolations that rang hollow. And I stood there with my portfolio, the villain of the story they would tell later. The daughter who ruined Thanksgiving. The sister who destroyed an engagement. The ungrateful child who exposed her parents instead of protecting them. But I was also the daughter who refused to be sacrificed. Who refused to let her sister be sacrificed unknowingly. Who brought the truth to light even though it cost me whatever scraps of family I had left. My grandmother stood up slowly, using her cane for support. She walked over to me and took my arm. Drive me home, she said. It wasn't a question. I picked up my bag and helped her to the door. Behind us, my mother called my name, but I didn't turn around. My grandmother and I walked out into the November cold, leaving the ruins of Thanksgiving dinner behind us. In the car, my grandmother was quiet for a long time. Then she said, You did the right thing. Did I? I asked. Bethany's engagement is over. Everyone thinks I'm a monster. Bethany's engagement was built on a lie, my grandmother said. Better she finds out now than after the wedding, when she's legally tied to a boy who thought he was marrying money. She paused. And you're not a monster. You're honest. In this family, that might as well be the same thing. I drove her to her small house on Oak Street, helped her inside, made sure she had everything she needed. She made tea, the ritual familiar and soothing. We sat at her kitchen table, and she told me stories about her own parents, her own family dramas, her own moments of choosing truth over comfort. Your grandfather used to say that family isn't about blood, she said. It's about who shows up when things get hard, who tells you the truth even when it hurts, who stands by you when everyone else walks away. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You showed up, Valerie. You told the truth. That's more than your parents did. I stayed there until late. Later than I should have if I was going to drive back to Chicago. But my grandmother insisted I take her spare room, and I was too tired to argue. Too tired from 6 hours of driving and 2 hours of family warfare. Too tired from carrying the weight of truth when everyone else wanted comfortable lies. I slept better that night than I had in months. 3 days after Thanksgiving, Bethany called me. I almost didn't answer. Almost let it go to voicemail. Afraid of what she would say, what accusations she would throw at me. But something made me pick up. "I need to talk to you," she said. Her voice was rough, like she had been crying. Knowing Bethany, she probably had been. "Okay," I said carefully. "Not on the phone. Can I come to Chicago? Can I stay with you for a few days?" This surprised me. "What about Mom and Dad?" "I can't be there right now," she said. "I can't look at them. I need space. Please." I should have said no. I should have protected my own peace, my own boundaries. But she was my sister, and underneath all the golden child favoritism and the years of comparison, there was still something there. Something that remembered sharing a room when we were kids, remembered inside jokes and secret languages, remembered being allies before we became rivals. "Okay," I said. "When?" She arrived the next day with 2 suitcases and eyes swollen from crying. My apartment in Chicago was small, barely big enough for me, but I made space. She took the couch. We ordered takeout. We didn't talk about it that first night. The second day, she started asking questions. Not angry questions, curious ones. When had I first suspected something was wrong? What had the papers they sent me actually said? How had I found out about the debt? I told her everything. Showed her the same documents I had brought to Thanksgiving dinner. Watched her face as she processed the numbers. The timeline. The deliberate deception. "They told me the house was paid off," she said. "They said they wanted to give it to me early, before they got too old to enjoy seeing me settle into it. They made it sound like a blessing. It would have been a curse," I said. "You would have been legally responsible for all of it. The debt, the missed payments, the foreclosure, it would have destroyed your credit for years." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "Marcus called me." "Oh?" "He wants to talk. He says he needs time to think, but he wants to talk." She twisted her engagement ring, still on her finger. "I don't know if I want to talk to him. He left me. Right there in front of everyone, he just left. He left the situation," I said carefully. "Not necessarily you. Isn't it the same thing?" "I don't know. Is it?" She didn't answer. We sat there in my small living room, surrounded by the debris of her imploded life, and I felt something shift between us. Something old and knotted beginning to loosen. Over the next few days, Bethany started to see our parents differently, started to remember other moments, other times when they had manipulated or controlled or used her for their own purposes. She had always been the favorite, but being a favorite daughter in our family meant being a useful daughter, meant performing the role they wanted, meeting the expectations they set, becoming the person they could show off to friends and family. "I don't think they ever actually asked me what I wanted," she said one night. We were watching a mindless show on television, not really paying attention. "They just told me what a good daughter would want, and I wanted to be good." "You are good," I said. "That's not the problem. The problem is they took advantage of it." The following week, my grandmother called. "The investigator wants to talk to you," she said. "What investigator?" "The one I called during Thanksgiving dinner," she said. Matter of fact, like this was a completely normal thing to have done. While everyone was yelling, I went into the study and called the financial fraud hotline. They sent someone out that night. I had missed this entirely, too focused on the drama at the table to notice my grandmother making phone calls in the other room. "Grandma, what did you do?" "What needed to be done?" she said. "Your parents tried to commit fraud, twice. Someone needed to report it. The investigator was a woman in her 40s named Detective Patterson, and she was thorough. She interviewed me over the phone, asked for copies of all my documentation, wanted to know every detail of my parents' attempt to transfer debt to me 6 months earlier. She asked about Bethany, too, whether she had known about the debt before agreeing to take the house. She didn't know anything, I told the detective. They deceived her completely. That's what she told me, too, Detective Patterson said. Your parents are in serious trouble, Ms. Valerie. What they did, attempting to transfer debt without full disclosure, attempting to defraud multiple creditors, forging documents, these are criminal offenses. Will there be charges? That depends on the prosecutor's office. But at minimum, the banks will accelerate their collection processes. Your parents will need to deal with this immediately or they'll lose the house within weeks. Which is exactly what happened. By mid-December, my parents had put the house up for sale. It sold quickly. Too quickly, really, for less than it was worth. They moved into a small apartment on the south side of town, the kind of place with thin walls and cheaper rent. the kind of place that reflected what they actually were, not what they had pretended to be. My mother called me once to scream about how I had ruined their lives. I listened until she ran out of breath, then quietly said, "You tried to ruin mine first," and hung up. My father didn't call at all. I heard from Uncle Pete that he had aged 10 years in 3 weeks, that he barely left the apartment, that he spent most days staring at the television without really watching it. Part of me felt guilty about this. Part of me wondered if I had gone too far, if exposing them publicly had been necessary, if I could have handled it differently. But then I would remember Bethany's face during that Thanksgiving dinner, the cruel smile as she announced my disinheritance, the way my parents had orchestrated the whole performance. They had wanted to humiliate me. They had wanted an audience for my punishment. They got an audience for their exposure instead. Bethany stayed with me through December. Marcus did eventually call, and they did eventually meet for coffee, but something fundamental had broken between them. She told me later that he couldn't stop seeing her as an extension of our parents, couldn't separate her from the lies they had told. By New Year's, she had officially ended the engagement and returned his ring. She also started therapy, real therapy, with a professional who specialized in family dynamics and emotional manipulation. She began to unpack years of being the golden child. Years of performing perfection, years of shaping herself to meet our parents' expectations. "I don't even know who I am," she admitted one night. "Without their approval, without trying to be what they want. I don't know what I actually like or want or believe." "Then figure it out," I said. "You have time." In January, Bethany moved back to Ohio, but not to our hometown. She got an apartment in Columbus, an hour away from our parents, far enough for independence but close enough for convenience. She got a job at a nonprofit, work that actually meant something to her instead of work that would impress our parents. She started taking art classes. She'd always loved drawing as a kid, but had been told it wasn't practical, wasn't a real career. She called me every week, sometimes to talk about therapy, sometimes to vent about our parents, sometimes just to chat about nothing in particular. We were building something new between us, a relationship based on honesty instead of competition, on support instead of comparison. "I'm sorry," she said during one of those calls, "for that Thanksgiving dinner, for the way I treated you, for everything." "I know," I said. "I forgive you." And I did. Because she hadn't known. Because she had been manipulated just like I had been manipulated. Just in different ways. Because she was trying to be better. And that counted for something. My grandmother started spending holidays with me in Chicago. She came for Christmas, for New Year's, for my birthday in February. We cooked together, watched old movies, played cards. She told me stories about my grandfather, about her own difficult relationship with her parents, about choosing the life she wanted instead of the life she was expected to want. "Your parents will never change," she told me one evening. "They'll always be who they are. Selfish, manipulative, unable to see past their own needs." She squeezed my hand. "But you can change. You can be different. You already are." My parents reached out occasionally. My mother more than my father. She would send texts, usually late at night, usually some variation on how much I had hurt them, how ungrateful I was, how I owed them for raising me. I stopped responding after the third or fourth message. There was nothing left to say. Some of my cousins reached out too. Cousin Jennifer sent a long email explaining that she had always suspected something was wrong in our family, that she was glad the truth had come out, that she hoped I was doing okay. Uncle Pete called to check in every few weeks, updating me on the family gossip, but also just talking about normal things, work, weather, books he was reading. Aunt Carol sent a card that said simply, "You were brave." I kept it on my refrigerator. By spring, life had settled into a new normal. I threw myself into work, earned another promotion, started dating someone I actually liked who worked in architecture. Bethany came to visit every other month, staying on my couch and exploring Chicago with me like tourists. My grandmother came for Easter, bringing her famous coconut cake and her sharp observations about life. My parents faded into the background of my life. Not gone entirely, they were still my parents, still existed in the world, but no longer central, no longer important, no longer capable of hurting me the way they once had. I thought about that Thanksgiving dinner sometimes, thought about the moment I opened that portfolio and spread those papers across the table, thought about the look on my father's face, the sound of Bethany crying, the shocked silence of 20 witnesses. I didn't regret it. Not for a second. Because the alternative was letting Bethany walk into a trap she didn't even know existed. The alternative was keeping quiet while my parents sacrificed another daughter to their own irresponsibility. The alternative was being complicit in the lie. Someone asked me once if it was worth it, losing my family, being labeled the villain, carrying the weight of that public exposure. They meant well, I think, but it was the wrong question. The right question was, what's the cost of silence? What's the cost of protecting people who won't protect you? What's the cost of letting lies persist because the truth is uncomfortable? I learned that silence isn't neutral. Silence is a choice. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be silent, even when everyone else wants you to be quiet. Bethany understood this now. She had spent 6 months in therapy unpacking the ways our parents had shaped her, molded her, used her. She had cried in my living room about the person she used to be, the person who would have smiled while announcing my disinheritance, the person who had been so desperate for approval that she couldn't see the manipulation. "I hate who I was," she said once. "Don't," I told her. You were doing the best you could with what you knew. Now you know better. Now you're doing better." One weekend in April, Bethany and I drove down to Ohio together. Not to see our parents. Neither of us were ready for that, might never be ready for that. But to see our grandmother. We spent the weekend at her house, cooking and talking and laughing. She showed us old photo albums, told us stories about our grandfather that we had never heard before, gave us each a piece of her jewelry that had belonged to her mother. "I won't be around forever," she said, matter of fact as always. "When I go, I want you two to have each other. You. Not your parents. Each other." "You're not going anywhere," Bethany said, but her voice wavered. "Someday I will," our grandmother said. "And when I do, I want to know that you girls will be okay, that you'll support each other, that you'll tell each other the truth, even when it's hard." We promised. We meant it. On the drive back to Chicago, Bethany was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Do you think they'll ever apologize?" "No," I said. "I don't think they will." "Why not?" "Because apologizing would mean admitting they were wrong, and they can't do that. They've built their entire identity around being right, being the parents, being in charge. Admitting they tried to destroy us would break something fundamental in how they see themselves. So that's it? We just never have a real relationship with them again? Maybe. Or maybe someday they'll surprise us. But I'm not holding my breath." "Me neither," she said quietly. We drove through Indiana in comfortable silence, the landscape flat and endless. Somewhere past Fort Wayne, Bethany fell asleep in the passenger seat, and I drove alone with my thoughts. Now, almost a year after that Thanksgiving dinner, I can look back and see the whole picture clearly. My parents didn't just try to transfer debt, they tried to transfer responsibility for their entire lives. When I refused to be that daughter, they moved on to Bethany. But she wasn't that daughter either. Not anymore. She had her own life now in Columbus, her own apartment, her own identity. She was taking pottery classes and dating a guy who taught high school history. She was figuring out who she was without the weight of being the golden child. My grandmother was family. Bethany was becoming family. Uncle Pete and Aunt Carol and Cousin Jennifer. They were family too. The found kind. The chosen kind. My parents were still out there somewhere in their small apartment, probably still casting me as the villain in their story. Maybe they told people I was selfish, ungrateful, cruel. Maybe I was. But I was also honest. I was also willing to speak up when everyone else wanted me silent. That Thanksgiving dinner felt like a lifetime ago, but I could still remember every detail. The weight of the portfolio in my hands, the way my grandmother's eyes followed me, the sound of Marcus's car driving away, the look on Bethany's face as she realized she had been betrayed by the people who claimed to love her most. Bethany and I talked about writing our parents a letter once, explaining everything. We drafted it together one night, going through versions trying to find the right words. But we never sent it. The letter was for us, not them. We needed to name what they had done, to see it written clearly. They wouldn't have understood anyway. So we kept it in a box with the mortgage papers and foreclosure notices. Proof that we weren't crazy, weren't wrong. I live in Chicago now, doing work I enjoy. Bethany visits every few months. My grandmother comes for holidays. Uncle Pete sends postcards from his travels. Cousin Jennifer and I meet for lunch when she's in town. My parents are still in Ohio, still waiting for daughters who won't come to save them. And I'm okay with that. More than okay. Because I learned something important at Thanksgiving. You can't save people who won't save themselves. You can't sacrifice your future for someone else's past. All you can do is tell the truth and live with the consequences. Choose integrity over comfort, and believe that honesty, even when it costs you everything, is worth more than a lie that cost you yourself. That's what I learned. That's what Bethany learned. That's what we carried forward. And that's enough.